How can I change that? What can I do differently? And if I keep asking myself these questions, I think getting started becomes simpler, and then you can keep iterating on top of it. But this can be a good overall benchmark to start off with, because if you're not intentional about the why, if you're not deliberate about defining the value proposition, I don't think it stands the test of time, or your own motivation eventually fades away because the fundamental is not clear.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's another episode of the Startup Popular Podcast or the Indian Silicon Valley Podcast, whichever you are listening to. I have with me the man of the moment, Jivraj Singh Sachar here. He's just completed 100 episodes of the Indian Silicon Valley Podcast. And I thought we could just catch up, have a freewheeling conversation about podcasting and everything else. So, hey, Jivraj, welcome and thanks for doing this.
My absolute pleasure, Roshan. Thanks so much for inviting me. I mean, none of this would have been possible without your support as well, because I remember our first conversation, which happened almost abruptly to us having more subsequent conversations, having that one group, and it's been such a pleasure to observe how you've built your podcast and have you as a supporter through the journey. So thanks a lot for that, and yeah, it's super to have this. I mean, eventually, finally, we're doing this so that all of those hidden conversations come out, and hopefully some people who are thinking of starting a podcast can take that leap of faith and give themselves the best gift there is, because I feel podcasting is the best thing that happened to me, and it's great to be doing this.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think everybody should start a podcast. The value of it is, on multiple different axes itself, right? We'll go into some aspects of podcasting, but Jivraj, I want to understand, how did you get started? I mean, I kind of know the story, but take
Yeah.
me back to, 2020, is it when you started?
Yes. 2020 is when I started, and this was during the pandemic. And I always wanted to, I still do want to build a company someday. And I always felt that I was at a disadvantage coming from Kolkata, not being a part of the ecosystem, did not have an engineering degree, so couldn't really build stuff from scratch while tools existed, and trying to cover up for that. I always realized that okay, I want to learn before I build. And also, I joined a company where I wanted to build, but that didn't play out too well. But I realized that one of the best forms of learning was through absorbing content. And when I realized that okay, my kind of content was sort of out there, but not completely out there. And what do I mean by my kind of content? What does a 20-year-old something in the startup ecosystem today want? They probably want to understand how startups get built in the country contextually, instead of having just the information of what is being built. While the what is pretty clear in the ecosystem, very often the how and why gets missed. And I wanted to bridge for that gap very candidly and almost naively. It was born out of curiosity, right? I didn't know any better at that time. It felt like something I would learn from, I would grow from, and I thought there would be more people like me who would like to absorb such content. And thankfully, I took that leap of faith and started there. So I think just being very clear as to okay, what was the white space I was targeting, and not just being driven by some random reason. It was something that, yeah, I guess helped me continue, and majorly curiosity to how startups are getting built in the country, because I felt that so much is happening, but I know very little. And to bridge that gap is why I got started. And yeah, it's turned out to be such a great decision.
Yeah, no, I think that why has to be really sincere, right? Because we've discussed this often. I mean, we both have day jobs, and you're pretty beaten down by 7:30, 8 in the evening, and then you're doing this podcast. I mean, you have to be enthusiastic about it, otherwise you wouldn't really go ahead with it, right? And it's been about 2 years of hustle for both of us, I would say. So yeah, I mean, the why is super important. Also, I think, I mean, if I can speak for the both of us, right? I mean, I don't think we knew 2 years back that we would do 100 or 170 episodes, right? I don't think that crossed our minds at all, right? It's something that organically builds up. It kind of becomes your lifestyle. And I started for very similar reasons, because I would often notice that the startup media, when it covered startups, it would either be unbridled enthusiasm or crushing cynicism. Either everything was amazing and it was all candy and rainbows and sparkles, or it was absolute shit, right? And there wasn't any executional wisdom out there. I mean, there wasn't wisdom to tell you stuff like, hey, how do I go from 0 to $100 million in sales? or how do I operate in fintech with all of the regulation, or how do I hire a VP of engineering, for instance, right? I mean, all of these things. And I've been in the startup ecosystem now for about 14 years, and I have seen the Indian startup ecosystem mature a great deal. 14 years back, you could hardly put people in a room together that knew some of the answers to these things, right? Today, I mean, I think again, the both of us discover so many insights on every damn podcast that we do, right?
I couldn't agree more. I still believe that media does a great job at information, but
Yeah.
there needs to be more people who bring out insights and learnings and true
Analysis.
knowledge. And yeah, exactly. And that is so important. And more people like us maybe can do that job, because there are these conversations happening in silos, in closed rooms, right? But somebody needs to put it out there for people who are not in the ecosystem, right? And that's why knowledge can be such a great leveler, content can be such a great leveler. And I think that's where this plays such a greater role, right? That's what I always wonder, and that's what keeps me going. But interestingly, I wanted to ask you this, and I had like a very benchmark sort of a thing, right? I definitely never thought I'll reach 100, and I was telling my parents the other day that, like, I've reached 100, but it doesn't feel, I mean, it feels like, okay, wow, like, how did I even get here? But it also feels like I ought to get here, because I mean, it feels like a lifestyle. I couldn't go without
Yeah.
publishing an episode on Sunday now, right? It doesn't just feel right. I mean, doing something else feels wrong now. But I want to understand from you, what was your litmus test, right? For me, it was like, I'll do this for 6 months, I'll see what happens after that. But for 6 months, I won't question myself, and I'll just focus on the process, love it, figure it out, right? Did you have anything of the kind? When did you know that this, okay, this is what I'm going to do? And you do like 2 episodes a week, and you have this entire team, so there's more time devotion, maybe like on a relative scale. How, when did you know that, okay, this is something I definitely want to keep on doing? For me, it was like starting off small and then reevaluating at a data point.
Right. No, that's a interesting question because, funnily enough, I've always been doing these conversations, right? So
Yeah.
I was an entrepreneur about 5 or 6 years back, and I transitioned to being an employee. And one thing that I was really afraid of is turning into the classic employee, right? I mean, think of Stanley from The Office, kind of,
Yeah.
checking out at 5 p.m. and there could be a fire in the building. He couldn't care, right? I was really afraid of that. And the way that I kept that Kida alive was to talk to a lot of founder friends, and I would have these
Hmm.
conversations over the weekend. I would meet them for chai, coffee, whatever it is. And of course, COVID happened, and all of these conversations, all these meetings came to an end, but I continued them on like Zoom or call or whatever. And I think the light bulb moment was just realizing that, hey, I mean, all of these insights, I mean, more people should hear about it, right? I mean, if I'm talking to this amazing person, why am I not like surfacing these insights for 100 or 1,000 more people to hear? I mean, and so, I mean, it wasn't one moment really. I mean, it just became part of my lifestyle. I think it's just something that I absorbed, I would say, right? But actually, to summarize this part of the conversation, right? I mean, Jivraj, for someone who is planning to start a podcast, how do they find the why, and how do they find that niche for them to sort of explore and build upon?
Yeah, primarily in terms of the why, be very intentional and truthful to what are you truly passionate about.
Mm.
Because when the going gets tough, and when listeners are not coming, or when you're editing a podcast, nothing will stand the test of time but your passion. So
Yeah.
if you're not genuinely passionate about something, and it could be different ways, right? Like, you could be generally passionate or just generally curious about a bunch of things. It could be philosophy, psychology. Choose the subject according to what pleases you. Don't fit the norm, right? I didn't think a lot about, okay, am I genuinely interested in startups? I've never worked in one, I've never been a part of the ecosystem. Will I be able to pull it off? Don't
Mm.
put guardrails to yourself. But if you're truly passionate about something and truly love it enough to dive deeper into it, just go for it. I think that should be your litmus test, and sit with yourself. I think inevitably, if you sit with yourself and you can observe patterns. For me, what was clear was I could go hours and hours to absorb entrepreneurial content, right? I've looked at these Y Combinator videos, Masters of Scale, 20-minute VC, and I knew that, okay, if I can consume as much, I could probably do a decent job at producing it as well. But once you've figured out that somewhat subject that you're passionate about, I think be very intellectually honest to yourself as to producing something unique, something that provides differentiated value to somebody listening. because I often wonder that, podcasting is so challenging because you're not selling a commodity, but you're literally fighting for mind space. And what are we most short of, right? I mean, even before this call, what were we talking? We don't have time. Nobody has time today.
Yeah,
So if I'm expecting even Roshan to like listen to my podcast, and if I can't be honest to myself in genuinely putting in that value, effort, and all of the other things that are required to make it worth his time, then I probably wouldn't be able to do a good job at it in the long run, right? Because I don't want to end up replicating something else, because that doesn't help anybody, including myself. So I think the second part of being true to yourself, of identifying what differentiated value you provide to somebody else,
mm,
is the second part of knowing what niche to develop or what area to focus in. But the first part is just boiling down, okay, this is the subject matter I want to discuss, or subject matter that I want to dive deeper into. How and the form factor and all of that can be decided by what is the differentiated value you provide. For me, for instance, it was long form, in depth content on strategy, on how to build a company. Very simply, right? How do you build a company in India is my mission statement. I want to make Indian Silicon Valley the largest repository of content for anybody who wants to start a company today. How can I make that happen? Then you dive deeper. That's the broad thesis, right? Then you dive deeper. Okay, what is media not doing a great job at? How can I change that? What can I do differently? And if I keep asking myself these questions, I think getting started becomes simpler, and then you can keep iterating on top of it. But this can be a good overall benchmark to start off with, because if you're not intentional about the why, if you're not deliberate about defining the value proposition, I don't think it stands the test of time, or your own motivation eventually fades away because the fundamental is not clear. And I think I've developed that over time. So all of this in hindsight, of course, but
yeah.
yeah, would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I think you have to start at the intersection of what you like and what you know. And that what you know is always a work in progress, right? I mean, no one can really know everything. And in fact, I think podcasters should kind of know something and not really, because then you want
Yes.
to explore more, right? And then when someone opens up all of that treasure trove of information, you want more, right? You want
Yes.
more and more out of that person, right? So I always give the example of Joe Rogan, right? I mean, he interviews, I don't know, God knows how many different people. One day he's talking to a neuroscientist, the other day he's talking to an astrophysicist, the next day he's talking to an actor, he's talking to an MMA guy, a comedian. One person cannot be all of these different things, right? But if you observe Joe's style, he kind of knows some things about each of these different domains and crafts that, I mean, that perhaps a lay person will kind of relate to, right? The average listener to a podcast is not an expert on one thing or the other. I mean, there will perhaps be one out of 100 who's an expert, but the average listener is just like yourself, right? And really, I mean, taking that listener on a quest to understand more is the podcaster's etiquette, I would say, right? So yeah, I mean, that's a pretty interesting thing. I will say, I mean, the one thing that I really appreciate about your podcast, Jivraj, is the founder stories that you bring up, right? I mean, which is I think superb, right? Really, really amazing. Your ability to dig deeper, find those values that made these people successful, because entrepreneurs are freaks, right? Founders are freaks. Like Steve Jobs said it, right? I mean, you have to have that passion. Otherwise, if you're a rational person, you'll kind of give up because it's too hard. And there are easier ways to make money, easier ways to live a good life, whatever it is, right? So I really love how you bring up founder stories, and I think that is the differentiated value proposition that I see in the Indian Silicon Valley podcast, right? And these folks are from so many different diverse backgrounds as well, right? So which leads me to the question, right? How do you pick your guests? How do you pick your content? How does it all come together?
Yeah, so I think curating is one of the greatest things that a podcaster can do, right? Because I mean, you want to be a listener, you want to be a lot of things, you want to be a great host, but the pre-podcast prep is perhaps one of the most important things, and I guess it gets missed very often on, and is often also misunderstood, right? Because people think of preparation as, let's say, theatrism, right? Like you make it theatrical, but you're not doing that. I think it's not being natural in a podcast and being prepared are not two mutually exclusive things, and we often think of it as
Yeah.
mutually exclusive for some reason. But the way I do this, and the way I recognized why I want to do this, more importantly, is that I wanted founders to also recognize that, okay, this is something more than just a natural conversation about why they started, right? Fortunately or unfortunately, most founders are attuned to the same story and same song over and over again because they've said it multiple times, especially some of the mature ones. Now, how do you derive deeper insights? You have to really go and know your stuff about them so that you can push it a step further. So, as a rule of thumb, I try to ensure that if I'm hosting somebody, I will do a lot of research on them. I'll watch almost all videos that they have been a part of in the past, be it interviews, keynote sessions, press releases, whatnot, right? All of that I'll look into and then curate a set of in depth questions that are derived from the same content that they've actively published but not gone deeper into, and which I feel can help demystify how they built their company. And I feel therein lies the sweet spot. Now, how do I go about finding these people? I think internet, again, as we all know, is a great leveler, and I thank my timing, right place, right time is a cliche thing to say, but I mean, both of us started a podcast when Indian entrepreneurship was on the brisk of like blowing up. 2021 was by far the best year, and although it's unfortunate when we are talking and people are talking about a downturn, whatnot, but starting a podcast in 2022 on entrepreneurship was probably the best thing to do because 2021 was
Yeah.
the best year, right? So more people were available. Also with COVID, I mean, if there was one advantage of this bad crisis and human crisis which went wrong, it was that people were freer because they had more time and they suddenly found themselves at home, and they also wanted to talk to newer people, and I leveraged that. So being a true student of Indian startups is what helped. I could be always on the lookout for new content and at the same time new people to host. And when I knew I wanted to host somebody, I would be super prepared when writing to them and I would leave no stone unturned. So if I want to host somebody, I'll approach them on Twitter DM, on LinkedIn DM, on Instagram DM, on email, and I'll keep following up with them until they say no. Of course, respectfully, and not invading their privacy or not being
Yeah.
disrespectful in any
This is
way.
not this is not a green light for you to be a creep, whoever you're looking.
Exactly. I mean, don't just bombard people with messages, but if you do it fundamentally right, I mean, if you just
Yeah.
strike the right chords, eventually founders are people, right? We can tend to blur that line, think of them as celebrities, and I'm also a fanboy of Indian founders. But it all honestly boils down to core motivations of why should a founder be on your podcast. If you can identify that and not give up. Like, I know I've been behind people for like 6 months. I'll follow up maybe once every 2 months, but people will eventually respond because these are inevitably busy people, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing that, acknowledging that, and keeping that in mind, but then still having the passion to continue. Because, I mean, if you have the long term view of, okay, I'm going to do this for the next 5 years, I don't mind even if somebody comes to my show a year from today. I will inevitably write to somebody. But the moment I think to myself and give up and be like, okay, this guy is busy, he's not going to be on my show, I want him on the next month, he's not waiting to be on anybody's show, or he or she, right? So, long story short, the good framework, I think, identifying guests is, of course, some amount of just being a student of what you're trying to do. So you catch these unknowns, right? I realized that I was consuming so much content that I would almost know after a point that this founder is to be found on Twitter better. That founder is to be found on LinkedIn better. That founder is an email freak, so he will definitely look at my email. The rest is upon me to make it attractive enough for him, for it to incite a response. So all of those things. Then also a bit of process. Like, I'm a process freak and I maintain a proper, call it a CRM or whatnot, right? I maintain a proper Notion document to understand which ones do I want to follow up with, who are the people I want to host, who are the people I've not hosted as of now, and things like that. So combining that true passion, a bit of just hustle, perseverance, and just like patience, along with process, goes a long way. And I think that's worked out really well for me. And just ambition there, right? Like, don't count yourself off. I see a lot of people just starting up be like, why should somebody be on my podcast, subconsciously, right? We don't often say it out loud, but we feel that, okay, we probably not, or at least I used to feel sometimes, if somebody's not worth, this might not be worth their time. But I eventually realized that you have to just be ambitious, right? And if they feel that it will be valuable, only then will they come on anyway. So recognizing that and going all in is my mantra.
Yeah, you have to take your chances for sure, right? So, Jivraj, what was the longest time a founder or someone on your podcast took, from
Yeah.
when you first approached them to finally, they're saying, yes, okay, I mean, yeah, to hell with it, I'm going to give you this opportunity to talk to me.
10.5 months is the one that comes to mind, and almost like a year. So, I mean, the founder said no at first. Then 6 months later, I approached him again, and I was like, I've done this much in the last 6 months. Why don't you think about it again? And then he finally agreed because he loved the fact that I came to him again, and he was like, we'll give it a shot. And it turned out to be one of my best episodes. And for one of the other one, it was a year where I never got a response from the founder because he was keeping busy. But then eventually, a couple of months later, I think 7, 8 months in to the first email, I got a response from their PR team stating that, okay, we've seen your podcast, it's grown really well. You've been messaging him as well. Why don't we do this, right? So, yeah, it's been truly gratifying. In hindsight, I could have done better things to reach there faster. I mean, asked for an intro or things like that. I was telling somebody, after a point it almost became like a, I don't know, some hidden pride or some hidden joy in pursuing people for months. But somebody was like, make life easy for yourself and
Yeah.
just ask for an intro. Why don't you do that? And now I try to do that more often because I've realized that maybe that might be worth it. But yeah, I think 10.5 months is definitely the one that strikes, and that 1 year one as well. But it's been so much fun. I mean, best episodes also. I it was worth the wait, I can tell you
Yeah.
that. So
I think
for
one of
anyone
those,
listening, don't give up.
I think one of those episodes was Kabir of Dunzo, right?
Kabir was there. Rebel Foods was the one for like ten
Oh,
and a
yeah.
half months. I hosted Jaideep, and Vasant of Small Case. It took me a long time as well, almost a year. Like I'm not sure about the exact timeline, but it took me a large amount of time.
Yeah. So for me, I have similar, right? I mean, I at any point of time, I'm probably reaching out to three or four of these founders because obviously, your schedule and their schedule doesn't sync up, right?
Exactly.
And for me, I mean, when I have to put out, let's say, roughly two episodes every week, I have to plan a great deal in advance, and I use cold reach outs, email, LinkedIn, Twitter, sometimes all at once. Right? In
Yeah.
fact, a lot of times all at once, and multiple follow ups and so on. But yeah, I mean, I do feel warm intros help a great deal, right? I mean, if you know people and then ask them to connect you, especially, I mean, if the person has been a guest before on the podcast, right? So for me, I mean, I interview primarily seed, series A, series B type of founders. So these are slightly more early stage founders. And so, I mean, I ask my guests straight up, actually, hey, who would you want me to host on the podcast? And, they usually have three or four names, and that's how I kind of select guests and whatnot. But sometimes, I mean, it's also a certain curiosity, right? I mean, for instance, I wanted to really understand what's happening in EV, and I happened to speak to a couple of folks on EV. Spoke to the founder of Bounce. I spoke to another founder of the startup called Power Global. They're building batteries, pretty cool. And sometimes, I wanted to understand some core science innovations, or I spoke to a couple of founders there. So it's also like chasing my own curiosity in that sense, and also leveraging some of my background, right? So I mean, I work in SaaS, and I talk to plenty of SaaS founders and know plenty of SaaS founders, and these folks are really the kindest folks. And yeah, I just reach out, and they're happy to be on the podcast. And also, I think, from both our perspectives, now that we have the 100, I think it's a lot more easier, right? Than episode number 5 or something, right? So it's a lot more
Absolutely.
easier. And best is, when someone says that I've already been following your podcast,
Yes, yes.
that's
No
amazing.
other compliment beats it. Yeah, I mean, I've come across your podcast, listened to it. I
Yeah,
mean, I loved that episode, and I don't think anything beats that for sure. It's
yeah,
so true. I think a point to add there is just to add more science to, how do you go after the guests for anybody who's trying to curate this, is maybe having some sort of perceived notion to what your listeners want to hear. You may not have like a complete idea, and you can go out there and figure it out as well, make it iterative like a startup founder would do, but to the degree. So somewhere in the middle is a good combination where you have some amount of foresight to, okay, this is something that will work well on the podcast and has not already been covered, and how can I then backtrack the right kind of people, to the point that Roshan mentioned about following your curiosity, that can be more mingled with what is the foresight for the podcast. So doing an entrepreneurship podcast, I knew I wanted to host people in terms of culture, people from different backgrounds, be it gaming, deep tech, SaaS, consumer, fintech. And so, how do you get that circle in, and who are the best people out there talking about these aspects, or forget best, rather, if I were to rephrase, more unexplored people whose insights can be truly valuable for somebody. If you can, figure out those people, get them on and talk to them about these topics that you already have some sense into and foresight of, I
Yeah.
think that really helps. And so that could be a good way to just give you direction to which kind of guest you want, and then you can then filter the search to a better suit the needs of what you're building and stuff like that.
A lot of it can be very organic as well, right? For example, I started using ticker tape for all of my stock market investing research and stuff. I just loved the product, right? And so I really wanted to talk to the founder. And my friends wouldn't stop raving about ultra human, and I wanted to understand what the hell this is about. And so I ended up speaking to Mohit, the founder, right? So a lot of it is that also, I feel. All right, let's move on to production. And this is one question that people ask me all the time, right? What mic, what software? Do I
Yeah.
need a ring light and this and that and whatnot? I mean, it's when people talk about podcasting, I think they think the first thing they need to do is go and get a mic, right? I mean,
Yes.
I didn't have a mic for the first, I don't know, 10, 20 podcasts, right? And
Same. I was
yeah,
just going to say.
and right now, I mean, I have like a beginner's mic, a Mano.
Exactly.
I've been planning to upgrade this for a while now, but I'm this 90s kid. So, I mean, I always have to earn things. I can't just like one click order stuff. So I'm planning to upgrade to a Shure. And
Yeah.
there's also this Blue Yeti, the mic, right, which is pretty good. But then, I mean, I've heard some complaints in terms of like a hissing noise and weird shit like that. But
Okay.
I think Shure or Audio Technica, one of these mics should be good. I tend to use earphones sometimes. I find headphones a little weird because it kind of boxes my ears in and I can only hear myself. So I
Yeah.
need some ambient, noise to feel like I'm talking more naturally. So I don't use earphones or headphones. I was talking to Jivraj, just before we started recording, that I was a big fan of Zoom for a long time because it just got the job done. But having moved to Riverside.fm, about a couple of months back, I don't know. I think I was probably living like a savage before this, right? So I love Riverside. I mean, it records at such a high fidelity and it's almost lossless, you could say. A fantastic listening pleasure, and I have a pretty normal ring light. So that is pretty much my setup. What about you, Jivraj?
Yeah, no, I think again the caveat here is start before thinking of
Yeah.
this. You'll figure it out. Please start. I mean, like nothing beats starting, and don't. This is the cold start problem where you'll wait for a mic and then for the other things and then figure out. So don't do that. For the longest time, I used to record without a mic, without headphones. I have recorded on speaker on my mic because I felt it was great. I literally like, and I used to read out from like a paper wherein I used to write questions. Those were my first 10 episodes. So don't worry. And you don't have to start with video and everything. So the good part about podcasts is you can start with the audio. You don't have to think about too much production and you can go in the future. And for me, this has been the setup since episode 15 now. I have one simple mic, which is the same one as yours, if I'm not wrong. I'm forgetting the brand, but we can put it up on the description. It doesn't cost as much. It costs under like I think 2,500 or something. So it's a very easy start. At least my mic, I record with that. I have headphones. I don't have a ring light, but thankfully the lighting in my room, I have all the lights on, so lighting is decent. And I have like a good. This is just my drapes, so nothing fancy in terms of the video setup. I do use headphones, which are, I mean, the ones that I use either way. So it just like suits me better. It's a matter of preference, I'd say that. But I record on Zoom. That's something I've been meaning to change. And so this is going to be, in fact, a good motivator for me to make that leap of faith, because I was like, I didn't know how people react to it more than anything, right? I'm happy to go ahead with another one, but I don't want this to be a friction led mechanism for my guests. But I'm probably going to work on that. And yeah, also probably going to upgrade the mic that's been on the cards. I mean, that was supposed to be my gift to myself on the 100th, but I have delayed that. But yeah, I think the hook is that you can figure these things out with time.
Yeah.
And you can of course upgrade. I'm sure there are people with better setups and stuff, so you can, it depends upon how ambitious you are with that and what's that on your priority list. But basic production for a podcast to provide high quality content to a listener is definitely possible with minimal preparation and minimal investment as well. So this should be one of the easier things to do when figuring it out, and you can take help from a lot of people around. So if anybody wants to start a podcast, just like do it. I mean, don't think about all of this.
Yeah, and which brings me to editing, right? Editing again, I think we have different approaches. So I have Thiru and Gunjan helping me with the editing, and I just made a call pretty early on that I mean, I would much rather focus on talking to people and not be bothered with editing because I already have a paucity of time. This is one of two podcasts that I run, and plus, I mean, on top of that, I'm have a day job as well and a family, whatnot. I mean, so I really don't have the time for it. But also, I mean, I did learn. I mean, I constantly learn a lot of these. Format changes, the edits, and everything from listening to a lot of podcasts. I think, I mean, that's one thing that I would encourage everyone is to listen to a lot of podcast content, right? Because then you kind of know what is good. Simple things like, hey, I mean, the first 5 seconds, 5 or 10 seconds, what is that you need to add? What do you want to put? I think I've experimented a ton of ways in this, right? So I've tried a soundtrack, I've tried an introduction, I've tried a highlight reel, I have tried a bit of both. I've tried different types of soundtracks. I mean, you name it, intro, outro, just plain voices with a little bit of a music background, everything. Done pretty much everything. Yeah, I mean, you edit the podcast yourself, Jivraj. So, are you planning to continue with that, or what is the plan?
No. Yeah, no, I think the idea is that once it becomes repeatable, you should leave it to somebody else. Initially, it might be a good idea, especially since I was creating podcast content for the first time. I definitely felt I should figure out editing. Although it's interesting, right? For the first 5 episodes, I tried to find an editor. And the way I started editing my own, because I used to always feel I wouldn't be able to do it. But the way I started on my own is I had to publish one Sunday, and by Saturday it was not done. I couldn't get hold of the editing person. And I was like, I can't miss this. And right now, it would be a shame if I did. So I had to almost push myself to learn. And it became one of those things that I started enjoying a lot, which is almost ironical. And I don't always enjoy it as well. So that caveat exists. I don't want to be sounding holier than thou and say that, okay, it's the best part of the process. It can tend to get repeatable, but I think enjoying it comes from the fact that I try to observe a lot of what I have done on the show, and I feel it makes me a listener to my own podcast in a great way because I tend to stop very often, take down notes, try to figure out if I'm acting on these insights also or not, right? I know it's one of those non scalables, but it depends on the preference. And since I was doing this for the first time, I figured this would be good. And my personal benchmark was this very milestone. I was like, okay, now that I've reached 100, I don't think I'm going to stop doing this, right? And I was always afraid that if I distance myself to the podcast, I might just eventually find the entire process I know redundant. This was always a fear. This still is, because I mean, I've seen the benefits of compounding now that I've lived it. I would never want to leave it. And so I didn't want to outsource any of these processes until I knew I was in it for the long haul. And now that my benchmark is here, I will let it go. But I think, like, to summarize, I think this is a personal choice. If you choose to do it, it can give you a lot of feedback loops for yourself. It can give you a lot of things to note as to how you want to proceed with the podcast. But even with that caveat, I would say that once it becomes too mechanical as a process and you know that it's okay, a repeatable thing, hand it over, right? This is with anything in life, more so with podcasting, so that you can focus on things which are non-repeatable, non-mechanical, which is the curation of the content, right? As you will free up time, because if you are eating up time from something, right, that editing time is coming from somewhere, you can always look at it from that opportunity time more than anything else, right? What is the time lost in editing that you can make up someplace else? And that's the lens that I am applying right now. That's my caveat on editing, but you can do it yourself. And also, not that anything fancy is required. The way I edit is very simple. Like, there's an intro, outro, outros now standardized. I used to record intros and outros separately. I've done summaries at the end and stuff. I realized that that was not scalable after a point, so I had to cut down on the outro. I still do a unique intro to everyone, which is a standard one. I played around with multiple as well, but realized that my sweet spot is giving a detailed introduction. I do a more longer introduction than most people, I feel, but I do that because I don't do that during the conversation, and I feel that's the combination I achieved at. But it is definitely possible. I edit on Audacity, very simple edits. My video edits are actually done by somebody else, which is a friend. A huge shout out to Shaurya for making that happen as well. Shaurya and Sanchit are the folks that are responsible. They are kids from school actually, who helped me out with this. So yeah, really thankful that they're helping me put out content on YouTube. But yes, that's my formula for editing.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I hated listening to my own podcast, but it's something that I had to develop really. I mean, and these days, I mean, I probably listen to my own podcast about a couple of times at the very least, once before it's released and once after, just to not do all of the million mistakes that you do on a podcast, right? So yeah, that's something. Okay, distribution. On the distribution front, I think I have. Yeah, I think the both of us have kept it fairly simple, right? I mean, we have social media handles. We share on social media. We share on, we distribute on 8 or 10 different platforms. That's pretty much it, right? I mean, if you work with Anchor, I mean, it takes care of all of this, all of these aspects. I do feel that somewhere, I mean, your own Twitter persona kind of adds to the podcast as well. I mean, if you are the kind of person who talks about that kind of content anyway, then the podcast just complements everything, right? And I talk about startups roughly 40-50% of the time, I think, perhaps more. And so some of these things, right, I mean, I use my podcast snippets and so on to kind of make a broader point that I was doing anyway. So for instance, I mean, there's been a lot of doom and gloom, and I don't think that it's reason to panic. It's certainly reason to be cautious. And so, I mean, I had this whole bit on the roundup, which we do on the weekends, where we cover news and events from the Indian startup ecosystem about how all of this is just unwarranted panic. I mean, and so I mean, I use that in a thread, right? I know it's a lot more organic. So I think distribution wise, you have to kind of become the podcast, right? I mean, that persona has to kind of overlap, I think, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's so true. And I've observed that personally from Roshan, and so much to learn from him, because I think the podcast does not feel like something different to his personality. It just feels like a natural extension of it. And that's a really good thing, because I mean, it also on the podcast then helps you be yourself, right? You don't have to manufacture a different personality when you're on the show. So it's basically just different expressions of your own self, which is probably the best gift you can give to a listener, right? Because then you're most authentic, natural, and candid all at the same time. So I think that really helps, and that's the way to go about it to a large extent. Also, the caveat here is I wouldn't, I mean, say that I can speak for myself that distribution is the most core focus for the podcast, because I was clear from day one that even if one person listens to it, I want to make curation my strength. Maybe not. I mean, of course, I want more people to listen to it, but that was not hash one priority for me. And that can differ for you, and you can of course figure out hacks in the world of I mean, internet again, which is the leveler. Social media gives you the opportunity of just putting out, repurposing content in multiple different ways, and there are multiple people who do a better job at this, of course. So I mean, taking cues in terms of either putting newsletters out, Instagram reels out, YouTube shorts out, putting out more detailed threads out and stuff like that are definitely better hacks. I would love to in fact chat on this WhatsApp thing that we started, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I started it as a unique thing, and there are these two hacks that I initially leveraged. One was I started off a WhatsApp business newsletter as a way to just simplify the way you consume content, because I feel sometimes it becomes difficult for you to go to a different medium, go to a, because YouTube is more intuitive, I think, but not audio. So you don't go to Spotify searching for, let's say, podcast always or a particular episode. How can I make it easier for a repeat listener to consume my content? And it was born out of that desire. It was a very basic WhatsApp newsletter where I would inbox on WhatsApp Messenger, the business account, to a lot of my listeners who subscribe to the podcast number, right? So that was like an interesting hack that I figured, and was it was a bit non-scalable. I'm not doing it actively anymore, but it was a great hack to get raw feedback, make people feel like they were talking directly to the host, which is a great superpower, right? I often wonder that the best people that I listen to, I would love to chat with them, right? Just to like have a conversation, and WhatsApp gave us the opportunity to do that. So I think that's something. The second hack was these partnerships with entrepreneurship cells that I started doing, and this was very active in the first 40 odd episodes. It was again non-scalable, but every week before an episode got out, I would go to an entrepreneurship cell because I was just out of college. I realized that okay, these are people who are my target persona, right? How can I get them interested in the podcast? I realized that okay, they need help with speakers, which I'm going to develop over time. Why don't I help them with resource, and in turn they can help me with reach, and we can do this on a cross collaboration basis. That I, since I was closer to the audience, figured it out. It was a very small hack. I don't know how it gets replicated, right? I don't think it's applicable across the board, but I'm sure similar hacks are applicable. So maybe figure out one of those hacks and cues that build a flywheel, and I think that can be super powerful and super impactful in the long run. So maybe that's something to think about, and those are two things I feel on the distribution end were decently unique to what I was able to do at the start.
Yeah. No, I could not agree more. I think if you do it for the numbers, you're going to get frustrated, right? Because it's going to take a while, right? Yes, the numbers will grow, but not, in the way that you think it will, right? I mean, you won't become Joe Rogan in 6 months or 1 year. In fact, Joe Rogan himself became Joe Rogan after about 10 years of effort, right? And you could only argue that maybe, I mean, he's really, really taken off in the last 3 years, right, post covid. So yeah, the WhatsApp thing, even I do that. I started very organically, learned it from you, and today I think there's about 400, 450 people on that. And it's pretty interesting to reach people's inbox, right, directly. And also people write back and say that, hey, I mean, when is your episode due, or that particular thing was amazing, or that was trash, or whatever it is. People give feedback, which is awesome. Try to be on as many platforms and as many different formats as possible. Some of the topical stuff will also work in my experience right now. For instance, I mean, deliveries, IPO has happened. I mean, if you can spin off something with respect to that and put something out, I mean, obviously it'll get picked up, right? I mean, that is useful as well. But yeah, I mean, these are a few ways that you could go ahead. The other thing also is, I mean, there is this whole myth that you have to have, I don't know, millions of subscribers to be really impactful or effective, and for it to mean something or be valuable for you. But trust me, I mean, the amount of opportunities that you get with even with a few hundred listens is a lot, right? And again, I mean, these few hundred listens or whatever, right, could be people that are really important in your world, so I think, yeah, I would again double down on everything what Jivraj said, which is the numbers matter to an extent, but they're not the end all be all for sure, right? All right, we're headed towards the end of the podcast. Jivraj, your favorites. Who are the best guests that you've had on the podcast?
Wow, I'd have to think a long time, but there are a couple ones that I keep going back to. That's been really impactful because I mean, to go back to your own show feels very gratifying. I mean, it's a different kind of satisfaction. I don't know how to express it almost. But there was this episode with Roy of Sequoia, which was really impactful. I really love it because it's very fundamental in nature, talks about really existential things, especially at the start, and lays down a great groundwork to how you can proceed. So I think that's one definitely that I really love. The second is Kabir of Dunzo, and these are almost like 50 episodes
Amazing
behind.
episode.
I loved how, so Kabir was a great combination of true authenticity, honesty, and also structure and clean thinking, right? Which is, I think, some of the like best traits to find. And when you can find it in consolidation, right, in the same person, it just like magic happens, in my opinion. So I think that's something I really love. Then there was an episode lately with Vikram Vaidyanathan of Matrix, and I think again, what I loved about that venture episode was it was very different. It was nothing like the general venture conversations, and spoke a lot to the in like I mean, Vikram was just amazing in explaining in structure and in very concise terms what he wanted to share. and that I think is a quality. So I think these are a couple that definitely come to mind. And yeah, I mean, lately I've been each episode feels like a gift, right? I could
Yeah.
go on and on about it, but it's been truly gratifying to know that content can have a valuable impact on somebody's thought process. Because I keep, like, if you think about it, and I mentioned this, we are a fighting for time, but also if this works and if people are taking out 50-55 minutes to watch a piece of content that you have produced in some shape or form, then you're impacting them in such a strong way, because hopefully that can be actionable as well. So I think keeping that in mind really stands out. But yeah, bunch of favorite ones. And I would love to point out my like which the conversation that I love on Roshan's episodes, which is, I think one is the one on sales with Jane Abil, right?
Right.
If pronouncing her name correctly.
Many.
I think I really loved that one. He was really nice. His 100th episode, if I'm not wrong, which was with the Vimo founder, right? I
Yeah.
think that I really loved as well. I had a look and it was really nice. And we've had some common guests. So that's the good part. I mean, I can go back to his podcast for research, and there's so much to learn. And I'm not just saying that because we are all talking, but I've said that to him in person as well. I'm guilty of not listening to enough of his content. That also I will accept. But yeah, the other piece that Roshan briefly alluded to, and I would love to echo, is that if you're creating, then definitely consume more than you create. But if you're not creating, then start creating. But if you're creating, then start consuming more. Don't get caught up in either, right? Because otherwise you're just like going down a rabbit hole, which will not lead to anything in the long run.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I like.
Almost weekly, we exchange notes, right? In terms of, hey, I mean, here is this cool podcast that I discovered. Check out, 10 minute to 14 minute, or look at the way the person asked this question or that answer or whatever it is. I mean, shout out to the podcasters collective, Archit and
Yes.
Krishna, and all of the amazing conversations that we have. Yeah, so this was fun, Jivraj, and congratulations again on 100. I hope you have another 100 more, maybe 1,000. Who knows, right? Uh,
Yes.
so yeah, keep at
No,
it.
thank you so much, Roshan. This was so lovely, and I think it was so great to finally chat with you on the record, right? I mean, as opposed to do it in a silo. I think this is also testament to how far it's come. I think it's been so nice knowing you, and all I can just mention to somebody, if you've ever thought of starting a podcast, I mean, just reach out to either of us also. I'm sure we'd love to have a chat and help you get started, but don't ponder over it too much. If you're genuinely curious, just start, because I
Yeah,
can assure you that looking back at 100 episodes, the only thing I can mention is I love doing what I do and I cannot live without it. And that is the testament to how far I've come and how far I've enjoyed the journey. So,
yeah.
yes, loved it. And
That's a
this was super awesome.
Yeah, that's a great note to end the podcast on. I mean, just a small addendum to that. I do feel the podcasting ecosystem in India is just getting started. And I think there's still a long, long way off. I mean, if you look at it purely by numbers, I think podcast listeners in India is at about 30 million. Just for perspective, YouTube is about 10 times that, 300, 350 million. And I think even the 30 million is, I mean, I think it's slightly on the higher side. It's more like 20, 25 million, I think, which in a nation of 1.4 billion people is peanuts, right?
Yeah.
At least with
Yeah.
600 million internet users is nothing really. So really, I mean, we have a long, long way to go, and it's a good time to get started. I hope you guys found value in all of the conversations that we've had on our podcast, and yeah, look forward to your support as well.
Certainly. Awesome note to end on. If you're taking away one thing from the podcast, this one at least, just start and like go ahead. This is a great thing to do as long as your fundamentals are.
Before you leave, don't forget to like this episode and rate and review us on your favorite podcast platforms. It helps more people discover our content. We produce a couple of episodes every week and a startup operator roundup on the weekends. Again, all valuable content. Please share these with your fellow startup operators. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our WhatsApp newsletter so you can get all of this content delivered straight to your inbox. I'll see you again on another episode.